Hello, it's Jim Lynn here. Welcome to episode 29 of Mr. Lynn's Workshop. All blades have one thing in common, and that is at some point you're going to have to regrind the primary bevel. Now there's plenty of videos available on how to do that by machine, but in this episode I'm going to show you how to do it by hand. But first, let's get that chisel back. This is a registered mortise chisel, and it's made by Crown Tools in Sheffield. Now, it's difficult to pin down a definitive explanation of why it's known as a registered chisel, and of course ask 10 woodworkers and you'll get 10 different answers. But the characteristics that make it stand out from other chisels is the fact that all the adjacent surfaces are square to each other and opposing sides are parallel. So perhaps then this creates a known mortise width and so registers or indexes the mortise. So pick up a 1-inch registered chisel and you'll get a 1-inch wide mortise, and the chisel registers the sides as it descends and keeps everything square. Maybe, I don't know for sure. Anyway, I've got 3 of these, and this is the largest at 1 inch wide by 5/16 of an inch thick, which is 25.4 by 8 millimeters. Now I've had these for nearly 20 years and haven't used any of them very much at all, and they've sat in various boxes over the years, and you can see they need a little fettling. There's some flash rust in various places, and although I've done some flattening on the back and sides, there's still a lot of these circular grinder marks visible, especially on the front, which I've not touched at all. Now it seems I've tried some grinding on the primary bevel but given up, and there is quite a big chip out of the edge. So plenty of work, so let's begin by getting some of this rust off. For this we need some kind of chemical help. I've been using this non-toxic Hammerite rust remover gel, which can be washed off. We'll also need an old brush to apply it, of course the chisel, a pair of scissors to cut this 4/0 wire wool, and finally some gloves. This gel is easy to use, just brush it on and leave to work for 15 minutes. I like to work it into the grind marks, and I also like to pile it up over any heavy spots. I've cut off a piece of wire wool, so now it's just a question of scrubbing off as much rust as I can. Finally, scrub off the gel with the wire wool under running water and dry it off. Remember to throw away the wire wool, that's full of water now, so it'll be useless. Notice it leaves some discolouring. This doesn't matter, that'll be taken care of when we polish the sides. At the moment we're really just making sure the metal is clean. That's going to help get a good grip in the honing guide. Right, let's get to work. So for this we'll need a low bench so we can get weight over the work. This one is just over 600 millimeters, so about 2 feet, and it comes just above my knees, and that's going to be important, as you'll see soon. On the bench I've placed my die-chem mat at one end and in the middle. On that I've placed my reference plate. Now you can use any flat surface, glass or tiles are good, but the weight of the granite helps with stability. Now we need some good quality coarse abrasive. This is 40 grit, some spray adhesive, the Veritas honing guide with the angle registration jig, of course the chisel, a small brush, a diamond file, a coarse diamond plate, a block of wood, an eraser, and finally you'll definitely need gloves. The first thing I'm going to do is grind away that nick on the cutting edge. Now I find it best to grind straight across at 90 degrees to the back and sides. So what I've done here is added a little fence to the block of wood, and that turns it into a kind of a tool shooting board. I've folded a piece of paper with the short side less wide than the block is thick, and put a ruler as a spacer between it and the block. This paper will protect the ruler and the granite from the diamonds. The diamond plate has a decent edge on it, and it's 90 degrees to the diamond surface, so this makes it quite easy to keep everything square to each other. The ruler generates a little gap between the block and the diamonds, preventing abrasion of the block. The left hand is keeping the chisel tight to the fence and the thumb pushes the edge towards the diamonds, keeping everything engaged. The right hand fingers are pushing the plate into the block and keeping everything square. It's actually quite easy with a bit of practice. After a few minutes work, all the nicks are gone except the wash one, which is about half gone. A few minutes more and we've got a nice clean edge. Let's get the abrasive set up now. Here I'm protecting the area against overspray as I load up the 40 grit paper with adhesive. And after leaving it for about 30 seconds to get tacky, it sticks to the granite immediately. Now not only am I re-grinding the primary bevel on this chisel, but I'm also changing the angle from 30 degrees to 20 degrees. This is because I want 30 degrees to be my sharpening or honing angle. I'm using the straight roller on the honing guide and I've tightened it as evenly as possible. Well, there's no sugar coating this. Grinding by hand takes the most time and it takes the most effort. So if we're going to do that, we need to protect our body. We don't want to end up with sore back, sore neck or sore elbows, or especially knuckles. If you've got even a little bit of arthritis in your knuckles, it's going to hurt after a while. So we can use our body to our advantage to help with this. So for instance, if I lean slightly forward and engage my thighs at the front part of the bench, I've got a rigid connection there. Now this means that I can keep my back straight, I can keep my core straight, and if I keep my arms straight, relatively locked in front of me, I can use the upper part of my body as the driving force for the chisel. This will save an awful lot of strain on the arms and shoulders, and particularly the lower back as well. And I don't need to press that hard if I'm using my body. I just need to connect the pressure from my body and my shoulders through my arms to my fingertips. And that means I don't need to press very hard with my fingers. So all this strategy is going to help us last for the amount of time it takes to grind away all that metal. Now we could be talking an hour or two, so you need to think about this. Finger position is quite important. This point where the primary bevel meets the front of the chisel, well, that's key. Our goal is to transfer a portion of the weight of our upper body to this point. Now we want even pressure, so we try to get our fingers placed symmetrically. Now we're mainly using the forefingers and middle fingers, and the other fingers just either provide support or are just kept out the way. And of course, as one grip gets tiring, just change to another. The bulk of the downward pressure is on that key point through the fingertips, but the thumbs have a role to play too. They engage on this area at the back, and their function is to keep the roller engaged. Now there's very little force required for that, it's more of just an awareness. Now you'll also find that all the fingers together naturally find a way of gripping the entire guide, so there's no worries over losing control. Before we start grinding, let's see what we're starting with. This primary bevel, actually it's a bit of a mess. There's at least 4 different facets there. I've obviously been experimenting at some point. As I said before, there's no sugar coating this. Changing to a lower primary bevel angle, particularly on a large chisel like this, takes a lot of work. I'm expecting it to take several hours, and I'm also expecting it to use up several sheets of paper. So I need some kind of a strategy against fatigue, against boredom, and also need some means of assessing progress. Avoiding fatigue is actually quite straightforward. Just don't go at it too hard. So first of all, apply pressure on the push stroke, with the pull stroke being simply to get back to the start. This uses the whole body as a motive force with the arms and hands locked. Now there's no way the blade can catch because the wear point is nowhere near the edge. Secondly, don't go on too long. Manage your time. I use a timer app on my iPhone and the Pomodoro technique. So I work for 15 minutes, then when the bell goes off, take a 10-minute break and then work, bell, 10-minute break, bell, and so on. So in the break, drink water, and every 4th break, eat something. Using this technique, I can do physical tasks for hours. Thirdly, get some kind of a rhythm or cadence going, moving over by a chisel width after each set. Work on half the sheet at a time from one side to the other, then brush off the filings from both the chisel and the paper. Every so often, say after 2 side-to-side sets, use the eraser to clean the paper. At this point I turn the paper around so that I can use the other half. When the chisel starts to feel too hot, I set it on a chunk of metal as a heat sink to pull the heat out. Now don't worry about losing the temper when grinding by hand. The heat will become too unbearable to touch long before that happens. Now initially progress will seem rapid and very visible, and you'll be thinking, great, this is quicker than I thought. And then it all seems to slow down and it gets so slow that you doubt anything's happening at all. So you need to keep a couple of points in mind. Each stroke on the paper removes a volume of metal. Now that's obviously width times length times depth, and during the entire process, width is the only dimension remaining constant. When you begin on the peak of the bevel, there's next to no length, so you're removing all depth. So visibly, that seems like rapid progress, but as the bevel grows in length, that ratio reverses so that each swipe removes more and more length, and therefore less and less depth, and that seems much less visibly obvious. So as you progress, you end up taking shallower cuts, but remember, you're still removing a volume of metal. But of course, even that is slowly reducing as the paper wears and is less effective. So, to keep your sanity, remember this: as long as filings are being created around the bevel, the paper is still cutting and metal is being removed, albeit at a gradually reducing rate. Of course, as the paper wears out, you'll start to notice less and less filings, and eventually you'll know when, just change the paper. As you can see, as I finish working this primary bevel, I like to get a good polish on any surface that's going to contact the wood. Now it took 4.5 hours to achieve this. Now it's definitely a long time, but remember I was changing the bevel angle to a more shallow one. That always takes a long time. Now I estimate that a normal regrind as part of a sharpening process wouldn't be much more than 15 minutes for a chisel this size. Well, we've finished grinding the new bevel, but we're still not done with this chisel. Before we sharpen it, we need to smooth off the top, bottom and sides. I need to remove these deep curved grind marks, so as a first step I'm going to replace them with straight grind marks. Now in this situation I feel 40 grit is too coarse unless you've got a lot of damage, so I'm starting off with 180 grit. Next I went straight to 2000 grit. Now it takes longer to replace the 180 grit scratches, but I find that for this motion direction the edge tends to catch on the coarser grits. Finally, for the back only, I'm using my 10,000 grit Waterstone to try to get an even better polish. For final sharpening I'm using the red 3 position on the guide and the red 30 position on the angle jig. Just a few pull strokes on the 1000 grit stone, feeling for the wire edge every so often, is enough to create that 30° secondary bevel. I like to improve the polish on a 4000 grit stone. After turning the micro bevel adjuster knob to the 6 o'clock position, I can finish up my sharpening on the 10,000 grit stone. Now never use the ruler trick with chisels, and I mean never. So, does the lower angle and the high polish help the chisel perform any better? Well, I think so, and I'll show what I mean with this test. For paring like this, we want the 30° bevel to do the cutting, with the rest of the primary bevel staying out of the way. The shaving should curl away itself with nothing to restrict it. For mortising, the more acute the wedge angle, the deeper the chisel will go. The 20-degree wedge angle allows more depth with each hammer blow until the wood won't compress anymore. You can hear that the hammer noise changes distinctly when the chisel has gone down as far as it can. And that 30-degree cutting bevel makes for a really strong edge. There's no sign of any chips. Well, I'm quite pleased with that. It's not the best chisel available, but it's perfectly acceptable for coarse or medium work. I'm posting this episode just after crossing the 1000 subscribers mark, which is fantastic. So to all of you out there who have subscribed, thank you. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Mr. Lynn's Workshop.